Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Simon Mott, Chief Marketing Officer with TrackInsight, to discuss what's next for the ETF industry as assets under management reach $10 trillion. Simon, it's great to see you again. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thanks, Jill. Great to be back.
All right. Well, the million-dollar question, or shall we say the $10 trillion question, is what's next for the industry having reached that incredible milestone?
Yeah, what an incredible number. And those of us who've been around a long time will remember when there were only a couple of $100 million in ETFs. So to reach 10 trillion in 2021 has been a huge achievement. ETFs really are on course to become the world's dominant fund structure. And I think that's well illustrated by the fact that over 1,000 ETFs have hit exchanges around the world here so far in 2021. But as we look forward to the next 10 or 20 trillion in additional assets, I think there's a couple of trends that we see which are playing a big role here. First of all, we've seen a lot of hype around crypto and Bitcoin ETFs over in the United States this year. At the moment, there's only a couple of choices out there for people. I think the industry is looking to understand what the SEC and what the regulators are going to do, and that may open the floodgates to a tremendous amount of new assets and new investors getting involved in the ETF markets. We've also just had a lot of focus, particularly on climate and sustainability, with the COP26 conference just finishing. A lot of ESG and a lot of sustainability ETFs have been launched, and investors have been snapping them up. So as we look to the future, I think we're going to see the ETF wrapper push to its limits in terms of what can be put inside that. And more managers will be adopting ETFs really as a disruptive distribution technology for their investment ideas. And while we talk about the US as the dominant market, we should also consider Europe and the Asia Pacific regions, which haven't really yet seen the traction in ETFs that you've had your side of the Atlantic. So opening up those markets, I think, is a huge opportunity for the industry as a whole.
Right. And Simon, you had mentioned crypto, but what have been the main trends in 2021 that have pushed ETFs through that $10 trillion barrier?
Well, Jill, we've had over $1 trillion in flows year to date. So it's really been a bumper year, and we're not done yet. But when we look at some of the areas that have been contributing to that, I think there's probably three areas that I would highlight. The first, as I mentioned, has been the embracing of ETFs by active managers. And generally, this has been reasonably successful. $200 billion in flows into actively managed ETFs so far this year. ESG, which probably gets more headlines than the active guys, but it hasn't grown quite as fast, has also picked up $140 billion of flows so far this year. And then some of these new products that we've seen coming out in the thematic space, which are targeting kind of unusual niches or emerging industries within the markets, have also been successful in terms of raising assets, with just shy of $90 billion of additional flow into those products this year. So I think they've been significant contributors to the overall success of the industry.
Right, and you mentioned thematic ETFs, which are reaching ever more niche sections of the market, but what have investors actually been buying?
Yeah, well, we track about 68 or so different themes here at TrackInsight, and when we kind of rank them in the year-to-date flows, we see a couple of trends. The one that investors really have been allocating to very heavily has been the alternative energy sector. That's captured just over $8.5 billion of new assets over the course of 2021. Hot on the heels of that have been people looking to China and looking at the way the Chinese economy is increasingly digitalizing. That's been a fantastic kind of carrot for investors, and about $8 billion of flows into that sector. But as we think about some of the niche areas that are coming out, as you said, a lot of them are focused on technology themes, and disruptive technology is hitting really every industry in the world. And that's seen about $6.5 billion of flows into that particular thematic so far this year. So we'll see what 2022 has in store. I think the lessons from this year has been volatility and a degree of unpredictability. But these long-term trends seem to be emerging with a great deal of clarity at the moment.
All right, Simon, we appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.